NCAA tournament expansion may be necessary as soon as 2025 in order to avoid what would be a catastrophic decision by Power-5 schools to form their own college basketball postseason tournament.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Happy Friday, folks. We got a new Zag alert as one of the walk-on spots on this roster has been filled. We also got an exhibition game on the schedule and an update on our women's soccer team to close out the show. But first, we're going to talk about the latest couple updates in the college basketball, college athletics landscape. A great article by Dana O'Neill of The Athletic talking about the speculation that the NCAA tournament may in fact expand sooner than later. This was a big talking point last summer, talking about whether the NCAA tournament should expand from 68 to 72. There was some conversation about it expanding all the way to 96. I believe SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey was really starting to push for bigger tournament, more teams. A lot of people trying to use the argument of like, well, 25% of all the Division I teams should be eligible for the postseason, blah, blah, blah. It was a very transparent move by Power-5 conference commissioners and Power-5 leadership to try to get more of their teams into the NCAA tournament. They just passionately dislike those pesky mid-majors that they feel are taking spots away from their more deserving programs. As Dana wrote, I'm paraphrasing a line from the article, highly recommend reading it if you have a subscription to The Athletic. It is a fantastic piece, as always, from Dana. But you talked about how people like the Cinderella team until Nevada gets a bid over North Carolina. And that's always kind of how I felt about it, is people really pretend like they like the Cinderella, but they never really do. When push comes to shove, it never feels like the Cinderella is actually the team people are really rooting for. And this is another kind of example of that. In the article, Dana says multiple sources she spoke to say a compromise between 68 and 96 could happen, again, potentially as soon as 2025, when all of the conference realignment moves that have been kind of agreed to in the last 16 months or so end up coming to fruition, when we have USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington in the Big Ten, when the Big 12 adds those four corner schools, when Stanford, Cal, and SMU all end up in the ACC. When all those moves happen, there is belief that the NCAA could agree to what was described in the article as an olive branch, effectively, to say, hey, we'll expand this tournament, we'll get more teams in, we'll get more of your crappy Power-5 teams into the NCAA tournament as a way to basically avoid the Power-5 schools doing what they clearly have the power to do, which is just separate from the NCAA entirely. And that's the fear. That's the concern. That's the thing that has me sweating, that has many of you sweating, that has people affiliated with mid-major programs, whether they're coaches, players, athletic directors, anybody in those positions, in those facilities, are pretty nervous. And it's basically because at this point, schools and programs and media companies are basically operating without any jurisdiction from the NCAA. The NCAA is not doing anything to prevent media companies and affiliated conferences and programs from doing whatever the heck they want. That has been extraordinarily clear based on the last 16 months and all these conference realignment moves. NIL is not being monitored in a way that is, it's not being monitored. There's no other statement that needs to be made there. It's not. It's a kind of the wild, wild west. The transfer portal, of course, the NCAA is attempting to enforce rules there somewhat arbitrarily, somewhat inconsistently. That's not exactly new to the NCAA, but the power that ESPN and Fox and other media companies have right now is more than the NCAA really has it in any situation. And while the schools in these situations are far more focused on football than they are basketball, at some point they could look at this and say, well, why are we even dealing with Florida Atlantic? Like, they're not doing us any good. We beat them, nobody cares. We lose to them, it's a big deal. So why don't we just eliminate them? And the frightening thing is they can just do that. There's not really anything stopping them from doing that. And that is massively concerning. It's massively concerning for the integrity of college athletics. It's massively concerning for the integrity of the NCAA tournament and the, kind of one of the last paragons of pure entertainment in college sports. And it's massively concerning for Gonzaga. And when it is a Locked On Zags podcast here, so that's kind of what I want to focus on. This is terrifying. There's not any other way to look at this or think about this. It is possible, maybe likely, that Gonzaga somehow finds a way to not get buried by this potential move. Certainly, it is possible that the NCAA expands the NCAA tournament. Maybe they bring it up to 80 teams. How that works, I don't know. Perhaps there is a 16-team tournament that takes place before the NCAA tournament. Those 16 teams fight for 4 spots. Those 4 spots end up getting into the field of 68. The other 12 teams get eliminated. That's an alternative. That's an option. That's something that makes sense logistically, how they make that work when that tournament takes place, how it moves everybody else's schedule. There are a bunch of things that would need to be resolved, how they pick the teams in that tournament, a whole lot of things. And this is just speculation on my part. 80 is not a number that I've specifically seen other than Dana saying between 68 and 96 and me picking a number that makes sense with a 64-team bracket and a 16-team bracket. It could reasonably happen. And this would allow more Power-5 teams to get into this tournament. It would satisfy the Clemsons of the world, the NC States of the world, the West Virginias who somehow made the tournament last year despite going 7-12 in conference play. Those teams who feel they deserve to get into the NCAA tournament despite sub 500 records, despite when they do end up getting a play in 11 seed, they usually get spanked by whatever mid-major team was already there in the first place. Those teams feel they deserve that. And whether we agree or not, it's pretty clear based on you. If you're listening to my show, you can probably tell I do not agree, but it doesn't really matter because they have the power to just change that. And they can idly threat to break off and form their own thing, or they can directly threat, which is already happening. Fox has created a new postseason tournament that's going to take place in Las Vegas. It is going to take place simultaneously with the NIT, and it is going to be eligible to Fox-affiliated conferences, which I believe is the Big 12, the Big 10, and I think the SEC is the other one. I can't actually, maybe it's the Big East. I can't remember. Third power conference. So teams that don't make the NCAA tournament in this situation would be required to play in this event. Would not be able to play in the NIT, required to play in this tournament because Fox owns the rights to those conferences. This is not just a coincidence that this is happening. It's not just, we're doing this to have another tournament to get more opportunities for teams to play, whatever. It is a very clear, direct message to the NCAA that they have the power to do this. And it's scary. I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about what it means for Gonzaga. Can Gonzaga find a way to get to qualify to be considered among the Power-5 programs so that they don't fall victim to this? I don't know. Because if they don't, if this happens, and again, it's not imminent necessarily. I don't want to completely scare everybody, but it's a little frightening. If this were to happen and Gonzaga were somehow not able to get involved, and there was an entire NCAA tournament of Power-5 teams, I guess it would still be Power-5 because you count the Big East, there's no longer the Pac-12. If that were to happen, Gonzaga would be the best, one of the best teams remaining in what would be an NCAA tournament with no Power-5 programs. Gonzaga could go on to win 10 straight national championships in that series. Nobody would care. It wouldn't count. Meanwhile, Gonzaga's recruiting would take a massive hit. Their brand awareness, recognition would take a massive hit. Financially, it would be devastating. It would be devastating. Could Gonzaga join some amalgamation of Mountain West Pac-12 schools that gets an autonomous 5 status and ends up joining that conference or that break off? Yes, possibly. But right now, the way that this is going, the things that we're talking about, they are still hypothetical. They are still not necessarily happening, but it is barreling in that direction. And we can't have the wool over our eyes for too much longer. This is happening, and it's accelerating at a rate that is pretty frightening. I don't know the solution. I don't know if expanding the NCAA tournament, how long that works as a solution. I don't know if the NCAA finds a way to get some kind of power back from the media companies, force this to not happen. Seems kind of unlikely, but it is possible, I suppose. You probably need government regulation at that point. That's the only step that I think could really prevent this from getting to the point where they do break off. Perhaps they will be convinced to only have that break off happen from football, and they will keep the NCAA tournament the way that it is. But it's not. It's going to be a rock fight. There is going to be a battle to keep the NCAA tournament the way it is. We have to hope that it wins out in a way that doesn't damage Gonzaga's reputation and really doesn't damage the integrity of what is one of the, if not the best sports event in all of the world, really. NCAA tournament is the best sporting event in the world. I believe that firmly. I know not everybody does, but it is my favorite event and many other people's favorite event. And the integrity of that event is in serious jeopardy right now. It is going to be a fight to keep it going the way that it has been for a long time. Expansion may be a Band-Aid, but I don't know if it's going to fix what's coming. Well, the Zags do have a new walk-on joining the team. We're going to introduce him and discuss the team's first announced exhibition matchup, all coming up after a word from today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you can have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's super easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, and then you just have to add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. From there, simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and ultimately hire. And let's be honest, adding the right team member can have a positive and measurable impact on your business. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners checking out the show on YouTube as well. We got a guest lined up, hopefully coming your way this weekend or early next week as well. We're also going to continue to talk about the updates in college athletics, talk about Gonzaga's schedule as we learn more about it and it gets shaped up. We're going to start our player preview series discussing every player on Gonzaga's roster. That's starting on October 10th. So still a couple weeks away until we get there, but keep your eyes peeled for that as well. For right now, though, the Zags got a new player. This was announced on Instagram by himself, hit this player on Wednesday, I believe. So it's a couple days ago that we saw this happen. He hasn't been listed on the roster yet. Name is Joaquim Arraez Moore. He was a 6'1", 168-pound guard from Branson High School in Ross, California. Finding information on him was a little bit tough. There wasn't a lot of data on him. I watched a few videos of some highlights from him. It sounds like he graduated in 2022, so I'm not sure if he was a student at Gonzaga last year and is now joining the team as a sophomore, whether he went to college somewhere else, whether he didn't go to college for a year. There's a lot of things that could have been the situation here. I don't know. What I do know is that he posted on Instagram multiple pictures of himself in a Gonzaga uniform, clearly part of the photo shoot that Gonzaga just took. For those of you who follow the team on Instagram or Twitter or wherever, you likely saw a variety of different pictures of the guys in new uniforms, new jerseys, all that stuff. He was among those players. He is wearing number 10 for the Zags next season. That's kind of the extent of what we know. Just a new walk-on, a new body. on the roster, replaces Kellen Mitchell / Abe Eagle, 2 walk-ons on last year's roster who are no longer with the program. Didn't hear an update from Mitchell specifically other than him not being on the roster anymore. Abe Eagle announced on Twitter that he is hanging up his spikes. His shoes. Again, he played for Gonzaga for the last couple of years, been on the roster for 3 years. I only played last season as somebody who was actually no longer redshirting, but he got in a couple games, scored a couple points, which is always cool to get the opportunity to do that. And I talked about this recently. Gonzaga needs more players on the roster. And adding walk-ons, they're certainly not taking a spot from anybody else or not taking a scholarship from anybody else. You need these guys to be in the program. They serve such a valuable role. They're not just, scrimmage bodies, although they are that. That is an important part of their role. Is they play they play against the starters. They mimic the opposing team's offense, mimic the opposing team's defense, showcase what their skills are, so that our starters and our key reserves can get that experience, can kind of learn how to go against the team that they're playing. But beyond that, they are also stewards of the program. They do a lot of community service work. They get out, they get involved in the Gonzaga community and the student population, often part of athletic committees when they can be, get good grades, do a lot of the things that help promote Gonzaga men's basketball in a positive way. That is a big part of a walk-on's job, a part of a walk-on's duty. They're not coaches, obviously, but it's not a secret that many Gonzaga walk-ons have kind of gone towards that coaching route. Of course, Rem Bakamis is perhaps the most notable example. He's now the director of player personnel for Arizona with Tommy Lloyd. And you start to see guys start to do that and kind of develop their coaching ears, their coaching eyes, because they're on the team, not necessarily to play, but to evaluate, to learn, to help the other players get better. That's a lot of what coaching is. So these guys kind of get the opportunity to do that. And I think you look at this kid coming into the program, wouldn't expect to see him on the floor, wouldn't expect to see him get one of the scholarship spots that is available. I talked about this recently on my Discord channel. If you have not joined, there is a link in the show notes. Click on that. You get free. It's free. Bunch of other Gonzaga fans talking there. It's a really fun environment and opportunity to talk Zag hoops. But Colby Brooks is probably going to get a scholarship. This is a guess on my part, but I suspect that if Gonzaga doesn't fill any spots in the next month or so, which is unlikely, not impossible. There are still players entering the transfer portal, believe it or not. But if they don't fill a spot, they will probably give Colby a scholarship. Because when you've been a walk-on in the program for multiple years, Colby's in his senior year. That's when those guys usually get those scholarships. Doesn't usually happen in year one. Doesn't often happen in year two, although sometimes it does. But I think Colby's going to get put on a scholarship, whereas I think Arayaz Moore is probably going to just be a walk-on for this next season. Still always cool to have new players joining the roster. So happy to see Joaquin on the team. The Zags also added an exhibition battle versus Lewis Clark State. Lewis Clark State is an NAIA school in Lewiston, Idaho. The Zags play them fairly regularly. This is not an opponent that should be kind of completely unknown to people who follow the team pretty religiously, for people who follow watch every game, watch the exhibition games. Gonzaga frequently plays Lewis Clark State. They're very local. That makes sense. Lewis Clark State is playing 2 exhibition games this year against Gonzaga and Arizona. Not a surprise at all. Of course, the relationship there with their coaching staff and Mark Few and Tommy Lloyd extends. So cool to see them get that opportunity. The main question I have now is what else Gonzaga is going to do. They could play 2 exhibition games. They could play 1 exhibition game and they could do a secret scrimmage game or a charity exhibition game. They could also play another non-Division I opponent in the season like they did last year when they played Eastern Oregon in late December. Those are kind of their options. One thing we've seen is that teams who are in the Maui Invitational, which of course includes Gonzaga, are scheduling these charity exhibition games where the proceeds from the event are going to help wildfire relief efforts in Maui. Kansas scheduled one. I think they're playing Illinois. Tennessee scheduled one against Michigan State. Kansas and Tennessee are 2 teams that are going to be in that Maui Invitational field alongside Gonzaga. Would be very cool to see Gonzaga also do this. Maybe they'd play Arizona. That would be the greatest situation. I would love a Gonzaga-Arizona exhibition game because it doesn't count. And the fear that these coaches have, the concern about playing each other when they're so familiar with each other, when there's still some overlap in players that Tommy Lloyd coached when he was at Gonzaga, players at Arizona that get Mark Few coach and Umar Ballo. I think that's why they're waiting, and they are potentially going to play each other next year in a MTE as well. So I would love to see it. I don't think we're going to get it. Arizona already, of course, has an exhibition game on their schedule against Lewis Clark State, but there are other teams. Maybe they'll schedule an exhibition against Baylor, maybe Duke, Xavier. Sean Miller and Mark Few have a good relationship. Perhaps that could be a game that gets on the schedule. Of course, Gonzaga hasn't finalized their actual non-conference schedule. Until they do that, we might not know if they're playing a second exhibition game, who it might be. All of those details still yet to be determined as of September 14th, as I'm recording this. But we will see if Gonzaga does add another exhibition game. But for now, we do know that one of their first contests of the year, probably their first contest of the year, will be against Lewis Clark State once again for the Zags. Closing out the show today, talking about women's soccer team. They are nationally ranked and barreling towards what is looking like their best season in school history. We're going to discuss all of that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Get ready for week 2 of the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is super easy to use. You can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you will not want to miss. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, segment 3 here. And as I always say in the intro of these shows, for those of you who are eagle-eyed everyday listeners, I say I provide news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today, we're kind of cashing in on that promise, and we're talking about the Gonzaga women's soccer team. A handful of you, many of you on Discord, I'm going to pump the Discord channel one more time, have been asking about the women's soccer team, asking about their success, asking to hear more about them on the podcast. And I want to oblige to that. And I want to get a chance to talk about more than just the men's and women's basketball teams. We talk about baseball periodically. We've done some conversation about track and field, especially with their prolific team last season. But this is kind of our first chance to talk about soccer. And this women's team absolutely deserves it. They're ranked 21 in the country right now. They are off to a 6-1-1 start. Of course, 6 wins, 1 loss, 1 tie. At this point, a recent West region poll listed them second among teams in the West region. That is behind Santa Clara, one of the best women's basketball teams in the entire country, of course, in the WCC. And the WCC very well represented on this West Coast region poll. UP is 4th, St. Mary's is 5th, Pepperdine is 7th, and Pacific is 10th. So a lot of teams in that WCC really shaping up to be a productive, solid season for the conference on the women's soccer side. Gonzaga's program best is 16th. They were ranked 16th in 2021. They had 2 weeks total where they were ranked in that poll. In 2021, they were ranked 20th. The next week, they bumped up to 16th. Those are the 2 times that this program has been ranked since 2006. So we're talking about a prolific era for Gonzaga women's soccer. This is the best that they have ever been. And it's not particularly close. Part of that is because historically, this has not been a great program. But right now, again, 3rd week ever being ranked. They're number 21. And if they keep this up, there's a good chance they're ranked for large chunks of the season. Again, we alluded to it earlier. WCC is not going to be easy. They are going to play some really tough teams. And if they come out of those games with losses or ties, that may hurt their chances of staying in the rankings. But this team has been a prolific goal-scoring team. Their most recent game was a 0-0 tie against Texas in Austin. They flew to Austin, Texas against the number 17 ranked Texas squad and tied them 0-0. That is a fantastic result, but it doesn't quite highlight what Gonzaga women's soccer has been about this year, because they are 3rd in the entire country in goals scored. Even after tying Texas, 3rd in the entire country with 30 goals scored through their 8 matchups. Their 23 assists through those 8 games is 11th in the country. So 3rd in goals, 11th in assists. Huge production from 2 key players, Gianna Riley and Kate Doyle. Gianna Riley is 1st in the WCC in points with 19. Kate Doyle is 2nd in the WCC with 16 total points. Riley is 7th in the entire nation with 8 goals scored. Again, really productive stuff from the Gonzaga women's soccer team. And I cannot highlight enough how much Gonzaga women's soccer has elevated their program in the last half decade. This stat really blew me away because on the Go Zags website, there's a great article showing some of the stats about this team through their first 8 games of the season. They have the same number of 10-win seasons over the last 6 years. In the last 6 years, they have had 5 10-win seasons. The entire rest of Gonzaga women's basketball history has also had 5 10-win seasons. So they've had more 10-win seasons in the last 6 years than they did in the entire history of the program. Huge shout out to their coach, Chris Watkins. He has been the catalyst for this. He joined the team in 2016. So again, basically right around when that streak started, his first year was in 2016. He led them to a 10-win season. That was their first 10-win season since 2007. Now, of course, that has become just commonplace for this program. Really, it's so critical for non-revenue generating sports, for sports where recruiting is so valuable and there's not exactly a lot of money being thrown at those programs to help with that. Coaching is so valuable. Getting a coach in who can identify talent, who can bring in talent, who can get the pieces to work together, incredibly valuable. The way that you can turn programs around like that just by getting the right person to lead the team is unbelievable. And Watkins has been that guy. He has been that person for this women's soccer team, Now they are barreling towards, like I said, one of the best seasons in history. And they got WCC's play starting very soon. They got 2 more matches before they get into conference play. They got Arizona in Spokane on September 16th. If you folks are in Spokane, you want to go see yourself a premier soccer game, go to Luger Field, check that one out. Again, it's on the 16th, 3 p.m. They also got South Florida in Tampa on September 24th. Nice little cross-country trip for them before they get back. And they start WCC play on the 30th against San Diego. All of their games, every single game from now until the rest of the season, will be on ESPN+. If you are a subscriber to ESPN+, if you have that Disney, Hulu, ESPN+ bundle, which is very, very valuable, I use it all the time. It's really great. If you have that, you get access to every one of these games. They will have one game on ESPNU. That will be their game on October 29th against Santa Clara. Again, Santa Clara, the best team in the West. Gonzaga right now, number 2 team in the West. 1 versus 2 is going to be a fantastic matchup. Again, that is on October 29th. That game will be on ESPNU. So if you have that, great opportunity to check out this program and watch them as they continue to make history, continue to be the best team in program history. As if the season goes the way that it could, this could be easily the most successful year in their history, and they could end up being a team that legitimately contends for national championship. That's going to wrap us up here for us today on the Locked On Zags podcast. Happy Friday. Happy weekend to all of you out there. Got some really fun stuff coming your way next week. Got a guest lined up. Like I said, we're going to continue to talk about stuff going on with the NCAA tournament, continue to look at the schedule as it gets finalized for Mark Few's squad. For now, though, have a fantastic weekend. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Of course, for checking it out on YouTube or wherever else you get your podcasts. Go hit that subscribe button if you have not done so on YouTube. Join us on Discord as well. The link is in the show notes. Once again, thank you all for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.